We have a situation where the political party in power actually uses the Department of Justice to go after their political opponents, something that you might expect in Russia or China or a banana republic. Who would have ever thought that you would see it blatantly manifested in our country? Never let anybody disparage your youth. You think about Jesus. He was only 33 years old when he was crucified. And Alexander Hamilton was making major decisions alongside George Washington at age 19. So, we need to get young people really energized, not so much concerned about what's happening with Taylor Swift. All right, my wife and I are absolutely delighted to be here. We like coming to Texas because there's a lot of people here with common sense. But I want to talk a little bit about what's going on in our nation today and why each person here is part of the solution to that, because we all have a sphere of influence. There's an election coming up in 3 weeks, and people think it's about Democrats and Republicans. But it's not about Democrats and Republicans. It's about people who understand and love the guiding principles that established this country and want a country that is of, by, and for the people, and people who want to fundamentally change this nation to somebody else, and they think that it should be of, for, and by the government. Now, interestingly enough, this has been something that's been raging for a long period of time. There have always been people who disagreed with the way that this country was formed. And they said, you can't have a country that's run on the will of the people. You have to have a monarch. You have to have a ruler. People are incapable of ruling themselves. And they fussed and fought over it. Our founders were very intellectual people. And they studied every governmental system that had ever existed in the history of the world, because they wanted to extract the good things and they wanted to leave the bad things out. They were eclectics. And it was difficult, but they discovered one thing that they didn't know before, and that is that all governments move in the same direction. They grow, they infiltrate, and they dominate. It doesn't matter how they start. They can start with very benign and wonderful intentions, and then they migrate toward domination. They wanted to give us something that would prevent that from happening. And it wasn't easy. And there was a lot of fighting. Everybody had different ideas. And in the last Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia in 1787, the whole thing almost fell apart because there was such vehement disagreement. And then the elder statesman, 81-year-old Benjamin Franklin, stood up in front of the assembly. He said, "Gentlemen, stop." He said, "Let's get down on our knees and let's seek wisdom from our Creator." And they knelt down and prayed, and they got up and they put together the Constitution of the United States, which I believe was a God-inspired document, if we would only follow it. That is the case. But when Franklin was exiting the building after this triumph, he was asked, "Sir, what do we have here? A monarchy or a republic?" And he famously replied, "A republic, if you can keep it. If you can keep it." We've kept it for 248 years. However, we are as close to losing it at this moment than we have ever been. we have a situation where the political party in power actually uses the Department of Justice to go after their political opponents, something that you might expect in Russia or China or a banana republic. Who would have ever thought that you would see it blatantly manifested in our country? And in recent weeks, you've had a lot of talk about disinformation. And maybe we should be punishing people who disseminate disinformation. That, of course, is laying the groundwork for censorship and domination. And if you look at countries that become Marxist countries and communist countries, it always starts out like that. We just don't want anybody to be offended. But then it migrates and changes, and they say that they're offended if you disagree with them. That becomes a very big problem. It requires a lot of courage to fight that. Now, we can change all that in this country pretty easily, because there are a lot of people who think the right way. And we have a lot of Christians, we have a lot of evangelicals. But in 2020, more than half of them didn't vote. That's millions of people who didn't vote in an election that was determined by thousands. And we have a lot of evangelicals and Christians who say, but both sides are corrupt, which of course is true. And they say, I don't want to be in a position of having to choose between the lesser of two evils, because it means I'll be choosing something that's evil. You've all heard that said. Newsflash. Unless Jesus Christ is on the ballot, you're always choosing between the lesser. And that, of course, is the reason that we have a brain. We're made in the image of God, so that we can analyze these things and figure out, is there a system that is best for me, for my children, for my grandchildren, for the people who are coming after me? Or does it not matter? And the fact of the matter is, I think if you do that analysis, you'll see that it matters tremendously. You take something like the Declaration of Independence. What does it say? It says we have certain unalienable rights given to us by our Creator, aka God. Among those being life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now you can do just a little analysis here, and you say, which side is for life? And which side is for death? You can do another analysis, and you can say, which side is for liberty, for you leading the life that you want to lead? And which side is for mandates? You must do this, and you must do that. Which side is for you spreading your wings and flying as far as you can go based on how hard you work and the talent you have? And which side says you're a victim and somebody else is in charge of what happens to your life? Again, these are not difficult things to figure out. But interestingly enough, there are those who have for a long time been trying to fundamentally change this nation. A lot of people think that this is something of recent origin. What you have to do is go and look at the Congressional record, January the 10th, 1963, over 60 years ago. Congressman Herlong of Florida read into the Congressional record the 45 goals of communism in America and how they plan to fundamentally change us. It came from a book by W. Leon Skousen called The Naked communist. He was an FBI agent who did extensive studies of our country. And among those 45 goals are things like gaining control of the school system and the teacher unions so you could indoctrinate the children. Gaining control of Hollywood and the news media so you could manipulate the culture. Making sexual perversion normal, natural, and healthy. Removing God from the public sector. Getting into the churches and changing the real gospel for the social gospel. Driving a wedge between parents and children. The list goes on, and as you read through it, you'll say, these are all the things that are happening in our society. And you can see that our society for a while, instead of moving upward, has been moving downward. That's one of the reasons that at American Cornerstone we established the executive branch for America. Because we want to encourage young people, like the ones in this audience, to become very familiar with how the government works. Do you realize in the executive branch of government there are 4 million employees? When a new president comes into office, he can change 3,000 of them. 3,000 out of 4 million. And a large majority of them, because all the agencies are located in the Washington, D.C. area, have Washington, D.C. type politics. And they can move things along or they can slow things up based on their politics. And a lot of times when an administration comes in that they don't like, they just slow walk everything. We need more people to help balance that off. People who think the right way so that the boat doesn't tip over. Because it will if everybody's on one side. And that becomes important. And that executive branch of America is an internet program that tells you all the ins and outs of all the federal agencies, how they work together, how a bill is created, how it is moved through, how it is passed, how a budget is formed, all the things that go into that, all the interactions, so that if you decide that you want to go into the public sphere as a public servant, you can hit the ground running. Most people, it takes a year. They're like deer caught in the headlights when they get into a place like Washington. This makes it easy for that not to happen. And guess what? It's free of charge. Doesn't cost you a thing. You can get certified. And more importantly, you'll be far ahead. And there are people who've been in all the offices who talk to you and tell you what their experiences are. AmericanCornerstone.org will give you access to that. So valuable, so very important. Also, we want people to know that there are forces like globalism and one world government that find the United States is a problem because we stand in the way. Our principles do not allow us into that sphere. So they cannot overcome us militarily. So they try to overcome us from within. How do you do that? Destroy the foundational building blocks of a nation. Our families, our communities. That's why our faith and our families are under such attack. That is the way to destroy us and to divide us. Have you noticed that wedges are being driven on the basis of age, income, race, gender, political affiliation, religion, you name it, driving wedges, dividing our societies. And the fact of the matter is, you can take the most radical left-wing person and the most radical right-wing person, and they're going to agree on 80% of stuff. But we allow that 20% to be stirred and presented as the most important thing, so that we have people who end up hating each other for no reason. We are friends and neighbors and colleagues. We are not enemies. W-A-N-E. We are not enemies. So important to realize that if we're going to be able to fight that's going on. Also, if there are some journalism majors here, journalism used to be a highly respected profession. And do you know that the press is the only business that is protected by our Constitution? It's because they were supposed to disseminate unbiased information to the people so that the country could be run on the will of the people. But when they put the thumb on the scale, and in our case, their foot on the scale, it distorts the information that people have. And when people have distorted information, they make distorted choices. And that's happening in our society. So I would encourage those of you who may be going into journalism to maybe be on the forefront of honest journalism and bring honor and respect back to that profession. It can be done, but it will require a great deal of courage to do that. And courage is sometimes not as abundant as we'd like it to be. When I was running for president, traveling all over this country to the smallest hamlets in North Dakota and Alabama to the largest cities, one of the things I discovered is that the people in general have common sense. What they don't have is courage. Most people would rather stand in the corner and stare at their feet than to speak up for what they believe in and possibly get canceled or have somebody call them a nasty name. That doesn't work. You really cannot be the land of the free if you're not the home of the brave. You have to be willing to stand up. Another thing that happens as a country is in the process of changing is dumbing down of the population. Have you noticed that? Have you seen any of those man on the street interviews? They ask people, simply like, who won the Civil War? France. I mean, they have no idea what the answer is. I mean, it must hurt to be that stupid. But the problem, of course, is when you don't know anything, you become very easy to manipulate. And people can say things to you like, oh, the southern border is completely under control. And you got billions of people coming across and terrorists and all kind of people. But if you're not an analytical person, you might just say, well, they said it was okay, so I guess it must be okay. We can't have that. You know, being dumb really affects the quality of your life. I can tell you from experience. You know, when I was a kid in the 5th grade, I was the dumbest kid in the class. And all the kids called me names, and everybody thought I was dumb. The teachers thought I was dumb. The only person who didn't think I was dumb was my mother. And she had tremendous faith in God, and she asked for wisdom. What could she do to get her young sons to understand the importance of education? And God gave her the wisdom. At least in her opinion. My brother and I didn't think it was wise at all. Because it was to turn off the TV and make us read books and submit to her written book reports, which she couldn't read. But we didn't know that. And I hated reading those books at first. But after a while, I actually began to enjoy reading the books as I read about explorers and entrepreneurs and scientists and surgeons. And I began to realize that the person who has the most to do with what happens to you in life is you. It's not somebody else. And you know, that's the spirit that helped push America to the forefront. The can-do attitude as opposed to the what can you do for me attitude. What a difference that makes. But within the space of a year and a half, I went from the bottom of the class to the top of the class, much to the consternation of all the kids who were laughing at me and calling me dummy. And now they were coming to me saying, Benny, how do you work this problem? And I would say, sit at my feet, youngster, while I instruct you. I was perhaps a little obnoxious, but I had a clear vision at that point of where I was going, of where my life was leading, and what a difference that makes. And you know, think about this country that we live in. In 1831, Alexis de Tocqueville came here. He came ostensibly to study our penal system, but he wanted to look at the whole country because the Europeans were fascinated. They couldn't comprehend how a fledgling new nation, barely 50 years old, was already competing with them on virtually every level. How was that possible? And he looked at our governmental structure and was duly impressed with our separation of powers. And then he looked at our business, and he was duly impressed by the environment that encouraged entrepreneurship and innovation. And he looked at our educational system, and he was blown away by the fact that he could go into forests and find a mountain man, and the guy could read. The guy could tell him about the Declaration of Independence. You didn't find that in other countries. And if you really want to be impressed, take a look at a 6th grade exit exam from 150 to 200 years ago. What you had to do to get a 6th grade certificate. Most people would be quite embarrassed today because they would not be able to pass that test, because we have allowed this to happen. And obviously, it's something that needs to be corrected. But the thing that impressed them more than any of those things were the churches and the fiery sermons that emanated from those pulpits, which inspired a ragtag bunch of militiamen to defeat the most powerful military force on earth and gave the people a sense of morality. And it made such a difference. And those are the things that allowed this country to accelerate from nowhere to the pinnacle of the world in record time, something that we must always keep in mind. And finally, we must remember that you cannot be the land of the free if you're not the home of the brave. Thank you.
Amen.
We're going to have a little Q&A here.
These questions came straight from the top, so I hope you can handle them. All right, first question. Could you give us a little glimpse into what it's like to be a member of the President's cabinet and what you expected? When you went into it, was it what you expected, or did the experience really defy your expectations?
Well, first of all, we actually had cabinet meetings. Different cabinet members would present at each cabinet meeting what they were doing. There was a lot of collaboration between the different agencies. And that gave us a tremendous amount of synergy, made a big difference. It was particularly easy for me because philosophically, President Trump and I are peas in a pod. We have very different personalities, though.
I didn't notice.
But we started every cabinet meeting with prayer and devotion. And it was something that we all look forward to because we got to learn what everybody else was doing. It makes a huge difference when you have synergy going on. And for things like homelessness, being able to get a lot of the other agencies involved and taking advantage of some of the rules that they had made it much faster for us to get things done. You take, for instance, the FYI program, Foster Youth to Independence. Some students from Ohio came to us, and they were telling us how they had aged out of foster care at age 18. And 20,000 young people age out of foster care each year in this country. A quarter of them end up homeless. A larger number than that end up being trafficked or having horrible situations thrust upon them. And we were so touched by all of that, that within 4 months, we had created the Foster Youth to Independence program that provided not only an apartment for them, but wraparound services. Because you can imagine, even if you're 18 and you have an apartment, but you don't have support, that's going to be a very difficult situation. So, but that's what happens when we combine forces with HHS and some of the other agencies. And the other thing that made it easy for us to get things done is fiscal responsibility. When I came to HUD, they had not had an audit in 8 years. You require for every federal agency to have an audit every year, but you couldn't do an audit because there were so many material defects. And so the first thing to do was really to find an amazing person, Herb Dennis, who was a senior partner at Ernst & Young. And my chief of staff, Andrew Hughes, who's a Texan, who's actually here tonight, called him every day for about 3 months until he finally gave up. And he came in, but they were able to actually fix things to the point where you never heard those stories. You know, you used to hear the stories about fiscal mismanagement at HUD and millions of dollars and nobody knew where they were. All of that disappeared about a year and a half into the Trump administration. It's probably the best run agency now. But having that made it possible to get a lot of other things done.
Efficiency comes to mind. Efficiency. So you're here tonight to talk about ACI's executive branch, which you mentioned in your speech, the Executive Branch for America program. Why did your team feel compelled to create this program?
Well, we felt compelled to create it because the people who actually do things in Washington are the staff people. You may think it's the senators and the congressmen and the secretaries, but they are largely the face of what's being done. It's the staffers who actually put all this stuff together, do all the analytics, and can either move something forward or slow something down. And I want young people here especially to know that you can play an incredible role in what happens in this country. And there's so many people who say, a pox on all their houses, I don't want anything to do with it, it's all much too corrupt. But if everybody has that opinion, then who's left to run things? The corrupt people, right? So we need to present the other side. And we need to also have people who are not abandoning their faith. We have so many people who are giving up their faith, and because they think that will make them popular or acceptable. That's not true. I remember when I started at HUD, a senior government official came to me and said, "Congratulations, but you're going to have to stop all this God stuff." I told him to go jump in the lake.
Congressional relations and public affairs is an area young kids could work at immediately in a new administration. Why are those departments specifically so important?
Which departments?
Let me find where I was. Congressional relations and public affairs. I'm a CCPA major, and I think I see a few out here too as well. So for corporate communication and public affairs and congressional relations, why are those two departments specifically so important?
Well, they're critical because, they are the ones who can communicate what is being done. Most people don't know what's being done because it's not communicated very well. And if you can get somebody who really has their ear to the ground and understands what the people are feeling and can communicate that back to the lawmakers, they can help craft something that is appropriate to solve the problems. You can see right now there's not a lot of problems that are getting solved because everything is just politics all the time. What will give me the advantage over my opponent, as opposed to what helps the people of the United States? If we were really thinking about that, and we will be, hopefully after November the 5th, you look at something like energy. You've got one side saying, green energy is the wave of the future, and nothing else is really acceptable. We're polluting and destroying the atmosphere. Well, you don't hear as much about that. You've noticed there's the climate change. People have gotten kind of silent. But then you have the other side that says we've got all these fossil fuels. We've got hundreds of years worth. We've learned how to extract it and use it in a very appropriate way. We have the cleanest water and air since we've been measuring it. And that's the way to go. Well, the fact of the matter is, the way to go is both. You use the one to get the other. They don't have to be mutually exclusive. And that's the way our society needs to work. We need to learn how to work together. It doesn't have to be my way or the highway, which really doesn't work in a society that has multiple components.
The all or nothing mentality. I actually learned more about that after I got married. Learned how that didn't work.
Speaking of marriage, have you noticed that we don't have as many people getting married anymore? A lot of cohabitation, and we're not producing children anymore. We're down to 1.6 births per woman. It requires 2.1 just to maintain the population. But those who've been married for a long time should become missionaries to tell young people that it's okay to get married. And, is there friction sometimes? Of course there is. You take two people from different environments, you put them under the same roof, it's going to be friction. It's sort of like taking two pieces of sandpaper and rubbing them together, a lot of friction in the beginning. But if you keep rubbing them together, what happens?
I think it gets smoother, hopefully.
Smooth.
Mine are still rubbing, so.
But we need to recognize that God's plan was for marriage with one man and one woman. And they should be faithful to each other, I was in the operating room one day and the telephone rang and the nurse held the phone up to my ear and it was the university lawyers. And they said, the state of Florida is trying to attach your wages for child support. And I said, what? I said, I have 3 children. I support them very well. They said, no, there's a woman in Florida who says you are the father of her son. And she knows where you went to high school, college, medical school, internship, residency. She even has a picture of you in scrubs. I said, anybody can get that stuff. On the basis of that, a paternity suit. And I had to get my lawyer involved, and it escalated. And then the state said, send us a blood specimen so we can do DNA testing. And I said, you people, as incompetent as you are, want me to send you my blood? I said, it'll end up at a murder scene and I'll be in jail for the rest of my life. And it escalated a bit more. And then it just fizzled and died. Because what happens is a lot of times people say, that guy is out and about all the time. He's in lots of different places. He's probably been messing around. He doesn't even know all the people he's messing around with. He's going to want to save his reputation, so he's going to fork over the money. But I had a secret weapon. I knew that the only woman I'd ever slept with in my whole life was my wife, so I didn't have to ask her. Is it possible that maybe the Lord gave us rules, not because he's tyrannical, but because he wants us to lead a very calm and peaceful and successful life without worrying about somebody tapping you on the shoulder and saying, remember that time you did such and such? And this is not to say that anybody who did such and such is a bad person, but you can make your life a whole lot easier if you follow God's rules.
So there's this common misconception about Washington that's full of old, stuffy people that sit around and make laws. I've never been to the Hill personally, but I've had a lot of friends do internships up there. They tell me there's plenty of young people roaming those halls. What role do you think young conservatives can fill in Washington, D.C.?
Well, first of all, there's a lot of old people there. I mean, really old people. And they just stay around forever. And it would be nice for them to go away sometimes. You know, when you think about youth, you look at something like Nobel Prizes in science and math. Most of the people who get those Nobel Prizes get them when they're in their 50s, 60s, or 70s. But they get it for work they did when they're in their 20s and 30s. And, you know, that's the time when you're really sharp and you're really energetic. And that's really a tremendous role for those young people. They can help those older, less energetic people and make really tremendous contributions. And that's what I was talking about when I was talking about EBA and the staffers and the young people who actually get the work done. They have a tremendous role to play. And never let anybody disparage your youth. You think about Jesus. He was only 33 years old when he was crucified, and he changed the world. So don't ever let anybody disparage your youth.
Amen. You know, I think about the founding fathers who you mentioned earlier, all very, very relatively young in age in comparison to who we have in Washington, D.C. today, and they made the greatest document to ever exist in government history. So
that's exactly right. You know, they were in their 20s and 30s. And Nathan Hale was only 17 when he was in the service doing amazing things. Alexander Hamilton was making major decisions alongside George Washington at age 19. So, we need to get young people really energized, not so much concerned about what's happening with Taylor Swift or whoever. I don't have anything against Taylor Swift.
I do.
But the fact of the matter is, what is really important? Is it the scores of the football team, or is it the scores that you make with the society, with the magnitude of your life? That's what we really need to be thinking about. And let the sports and the entertainment be a peripheral thing rather than the central part of your life.
We've got two more here. So there's a lot of civic-minded, motivated, and brilliant young conservative minds in the room tonight. What advice do you have for them in getting involved in America's great experiment?
Well, if you don't do it, no one else will. And, get people in your sphere of influence involved. You're told from the time that you're a child, the two things you never talk about, politics and religion. Talk about those things. It's important to talk about them because those are the things that have been important.
It's usually the first two things I talk about, actually. I don't just go against the grain, I guess, but...
Well, evil does not flourish in light. It flourishes in darkness, and that's why you have to shine the light on those things. And it will make a huge, huge difference. And also, be bold. Donald Trump, for instance, is a bold person. Now, some people don't like him. I will admit that. And a lot of people say, I love his policies, they're very good, but I can't stand him, and I could never vote for him. Well, I would say, what if you were a patient and you had a fatal disease that could be cured by a very talented surgeon? Would you rather have the surgeon who has poor bedside manner but cures everybody, or the surgeon who has beautiful words and kills everybody? And again, that's why we have these really sophisticated brains. The human brain has billions and billions of neurons, hundreds of billions of interconnections, remembers everything you've ever seen, everything you've ever heard, can process more than 2 million bits of information per second. You can't overload it. Some people say, don't learn all that stuff, you'll overload your brain. What a bunch of crap. You can't overload the human brain. If you learn one new fact every second, it would take you more than 3 million years to challenge the capacity of your brain. So no worries there whatsoever. But while I'm talking about the brain, there's one thing that I want to mention here. And that is, when I was a first-year medical student, I said, I've made it. I wanted to be a doctor all my life, and now I'm finally over the last hurdle. I'm in medical school. But I did terribly on the first set of comprehensive exams. So poorly, in fact, that I was sent to see my counselor, who looked at my record and said, you seem like a very intelligent young man. I bet there are a lot of things you could do outside of medicine. And he tried to convince me to drop out of medical school, says I wasn't cut out to be a doctor. I was devastated. The person who's supposed to be helping me get through tells me to drop out. I went back to my apartment and I just prayed and I said, Lord, help me, because I don't know what to do. And then I started thinking, what kind of courses have you always done very well in? And I realized I did very well in courses where I did a lot of reading. And I said, what kind of courses have you struggled in? And I realized I struggled in courses where I listen to a lot of boring lectures. Because I don't get anything out of boring lectures. Zero, nothing. And there I was sitting in 6 hours worth of boring lectures every day. So I made an executive decision to skip the boring lectures and to spend that time reading. And the rest of medical school was a snap after that. And years later, when I was back at my medical school as the commencement speaker, I was looking for that counselor because I was going to tell him he wasn't cut out to be a counselor. But, you know, some people are just negative, negative, negative. They can always find a reason that you can't do something. What if they devoted that energy to figuring out why you can do it?
Hey man, I think to answer your question, I'd rather have a surgeon like you who's beautiful with words and saves everyone. So. Last question here. I think one thing most Americans can agree on is that we all think Washington, D.C. is broken. Why do you think Washington, D.C., if it is so dysfunctional, and what do you think we can do to fix it?
I think the answer to that is very straightforward. There are a lot of people in Washington who are there for themselves and not for the people. And there are a lot of people there who have very big egos. And when you're looking only for number one, as opposed to doing your job, you're going to introduce a lot of dysfunctionality into the system. That's what we're seeing. And what they need is they need to win the war of 1812. Proverbs 18:12. It says, before destruction, the heart of man is haughty, and before honor is humility. And just bring a little humility so that you can look at others rather than yourself. And I think we can bring that dysfunction to an end. And that's why we should pray for our leaders, all of them, on all sides of the aisle, because there is still the potential for this nation to rise and to be like an eagle that leads the way, that's inspiring to the rest of the world, to be the leader of the world, and to help us to return to being one nation under God, indivisible.
Got one more question. It's not on the paper. I just want to ask you. What was it like being on a debate stage with Donald Trump? Just got to ask. Because I'm up here with you tonight, and I think if you asked me one question, I'd probably evaporate. So.
Well, actually, Donald Trump and I got along very well. We got to know each other during the campaign. And that's why I dropped out when I did, because I didn't really want to be president, but I ran for president because I was afraid we were going to lose our country. And when I discovered that he had the same philosophy as I did, and he wanted to be president, I said, this is easy. But, you know, he never really came much of the attack on me because he knew that we were very much compatible with each other. And we've become good friends over the course of time. And I just pray that God will continue to give him the strength, because he's been attacked mercilessly from the very beginning. And, you know, he's actually a really nice guy when he's not being attacked. But when is that? He's always being attacked. I could tell you some amazing stories about wonderful things that he has done for people. He doesn't like to talk about it. He doesn't like to put it in the limelight. But he's done just incredible things because he has a good heart. And if you go to Mar-a-Lago or Trump Towers, and you see the people who work there. Most of them have been there a long time. He knows them by name. That doesn't happen with somebody whose initials are KH.
Well, Dr. Carson, I think that's all that we have for you tonight, so we really appreciate you being here, and thank you so much. God bless.
Thank you. Thanks.
Ever wondered why secret societies are secret? Why is it that an overwhelming majority of elite leaders in America, including those who've occupied the highest office, have belonged to an organization in the vast network of secret societies, whose rituals and teachings derived from the ancient mystery schools of Egypt and Babylon? Why is death the penalty for breaking a secret society oath? Why do they pay homage to pagan gods and goddesses? Why do many self-proclaimed Christians belong to these secret societies when their practices blatantly violate God's commandments, such as Exodus 20:3, which states, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me"? And why don't most of their pastors say anything about it? Is there a secret motive behind the positive PR that many of these secret organizations receive for their good deeds, such as feeding programs, scholarships, volunteering, youth mentoring, etc., that even the lower-ranking members of these societies don't know about? Could today's network of these secret societies be the architects and workers of the Antichrist New World Order, aka Illuminati, as prophesied in the Holy Bible? These questions and more will be answered by author and evangelist Rayford L. Johnson, who has spent more than 20 years researching, writing, and teaching on the occult. Johnson has counseled and ministered demon deliverance prayers on many former members of the occult. Many of them have testified that they have been set free by the power of Jesus Christ from the spiritual torment and generational curses that the pagan rituals and oaths have unknowingly brought upon them and even their family through the spiritual legalities of breaking God's commandments. As God's word tells us, it's the truth that makes you free. Get your copy of the Greek letter exposed today on Amazon in paperback and Kindle.